Welcome to As the Story Grows. I'm Brian Patton. Today we welcome Keith from the New Scene podcast to the show. Two podcast hosts, what could go wrong? Keith has a new band called Memory Entry, and their debut single, Crawler, is out today. There's a brief clip of the song at the end of the episode, so check it out and then go give the whole thing a spin. Keith talks about having a strong scene in the Philadelphia suburbs, how he went from Instagram page to podcast host, his time with the Darling Fire, and his new band, Memory Entry. I don't listen to a lot of music podcasts these days because I'm so involved in doing As the Story Grows and chatting with bands and listening to albums all the time, but I always check out the New Scene on Mondays when episodes drop. And if you're a fan of As the Story Grows, you'll like the New Scene as well. And Keith is just a charismatic person, so I think everybody will enjoy this episode. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of As the Story Grows. If you're brand new to the podcast, welcome. If Keith sent you, extra welcome. You can find links in the show notes or at asthestorygrows.com to our podcast community on Discord. You can sign up for our mailing list over on Substack, or you can support the show financially and get early access to every episode via Patreon. And if you aren't already a subscriber, I would love it if you subscribe to the podcast. And if you think somebody might enjoy this episode, I would love it if you shared it with them, or any episode that is in our back catalog, over 500 for you to choose from. Enjoy today's chat with Keith from the New Scene. How you doing?
I'm good. It's been a busy week.
Yeah.
My day job is busy. My band is busy because that's launching next week. And the podcast is really busy. I'm gearing up for a big September. I almost had my busiest week ever. I had 4 recording sessions set for 1 week, but 2 got pushed to another week, which I was fine with. So things are busy, but they're good. I mean, like, I'm doing everything I want to do.
Yeah, that's rad. I've done a span of 8 interviews in a 6-day block. That is like the most I've ever done. Yeah.
Whoa. It's intense, right?
Yeah.
I try not to do more than 2 in a week, but sometimes you have to.
Yeah. For sure. You're up in New York. I know that, but you grew up, I just heard you mention this on a podcast, in the suburbs of Philly.
Yes. Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Nice. Pendle, Bristol, Levittown. Represent.
Nice. What was growing up like?
It was like lower middle class. When we lived in Bristol, that was like not the best school district. So our parents sent us to Catholic school. So I went to Catholic school, like grade school, high school. And then we moved to Levittown, which was better. And it was just like a kind of a normal suburb. There was woods to play in, which was cool. There was, once we got older, there was trouble to get into, like driving around and paintballing people's cars and throwing eggs at stuff, and, hanging out in diners and eventually finding hardcore shows. And there was very, very thriving scene in Bucks County. When I got started going to shows, I was 16 or 17, somewhere around there, living in Levittown. And I met the guys from This Day Forward. The singer worked at a movie theater, and I met another friend, Pat, and they just started bringing me to shows. And they would book shows. Everyone came through. Let's see. I'm Poison the Well, From Autumn to Ashes, Dillinger's Escape Plan, my friend booked at one point. That was in Philly though. But like, it was just, we had like a whole thing going on in the suburbs. So it was I actually look fondly back on it now, everywhere I lived.
That's cool. It's cool that you had like a good scene in the burbs when, Philly was so close, and it wasn't like everything you had to drive into the city for all your shows. That's cool.
Yeah, we would do that too, which Yeah, actually, one of the first times I drove into Philly for a show, it was Botch and Dillinger Escape Plan in 98, 99, when We Are the Romans just came out. And I got into a car accident with a taxi cab. And then I drove home, and my dad was very mad at me. But hey, this is the things you have to do to see good music. Shut up!
What got you into music at first? What was your intro point?
I think I always liked it. I remember being in second grade and listening to the radio and like waiting for the big hit singles to come out. I remember like really liking MC Hammer and Criss Cross and Richard Marx, and I would just make these. I would make mixtapes. I would make mixtapes for like my parents and try to find music they liked. I remember being in grade school and like DJing our little class parties. Once alternative hit, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots, that like really thrust me into it. And I was like listening to a lot of top 40, like R&B, rap, whatever. And then I got more into guitar driven music. Once the alternative stuff hit, I was really into Green Day and Stone Temple Pilots. Still like them. And then, just got into new metal once that started hitting. Like the second Korn album, I found like Korn and Soulfly and Deftones, and then I discovered the hardcore scene in let's say '98 when I met all those guys I was talking about earlier, and then. It was a Dillinger Escape Plan show. That was the first big hardcore show I went to. And everyone's like, we're going to watch Dillinger. We're going to watch Dillinger. And I was like, okay. And I'm right up front. And they start. And it was the most terrifying thing. One of the most terrifying things I had ever experienced in my life to that point. I remember Ben like swinging his guitar over my head. I remember people jumping on top of me. There was two giant guys dressed as clowns.
Oh, jeez.
Beating the shit out of each other in the pit. And everyone was going insane. Afterwards, there was blood in the pit, and someone drew a pentagram in it. And I was hooked after that because, like, I went to one show before that, which was the first Family Values tour. It was Korn and Ice Cube and Orgy and Rammstein, which is cool. It was a cool show, but like once, and you probably know this, once you go to like a hardcore show and almost die, it's right there. It's right in your face. So it's like. That I was hooked ever since.
Yeah. I mean, it's like watching roller coasters and horror movies. There's like a danger and a risk there, but ultimately you're safe.
Yeah.
So like,
yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully. Yeah. At what point did you pick up an instrument and were you just like, okay, I need to start a band?
I tried to play guitar in like 6th grade, but I gave up, and then once I started going to local shows and hardcore shows. All of my friends were in bands. I knew the guys in This Day Forward. I had some other friends that were in a punk band called Snatch. I knew some other guys in a band called As We Grow. My other friends were in A Life Once Lost. Everyone was in bands. Everyone was in great bands. And I was like, if they can do it, I can do it. So I got a bass and I started learning songs. And then when I was 20, that's when I started playing guitar and really focusing more on guitar. But I didn't get into a band until I really wanted to be in a band, but I wanted to like sing for a hardcore band.
Okay.
But I was like, I'm still so introverted. I was like ashamed to tell anyone I wanted to be in a band. So I would drive around and like put on the Turmoil CD and like scream along with it in my car to like practice for the day I would become a singer, which, it just happened, but we'll talk about that later. But I didn't get into a band and I really wanted to get into a band. So when I was 24, I joined this band called Paper Tiger, which was like, my friend Nick was the singer and guitar player, and he really liked, Morrissey and Morrissey, Smiths, Joy Division, New Order, like all that kind of stuff. So it was like, imagine all of that, but like kind of rockish, kind of emo-ish too.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that was my first band when I was 24, and I played bass.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
Did you move into Philadelphia proper for college, or just like that was just you moved to the city from the suburbs when you're a young adult?
Yeah, the second one, because I lived at home until I was 21. I was on a tour with This Day Forward. I went on 2 tours with them. I sold merch for them. So the second tour was This Day Forward, Thursday, and Every Time I Die.
Oh, nice.
Hot Damn had just come out for Every Time I Die. Great album. War All the Time had just come out for Thursday, and This Day Forward just put out In Response. I was on the tour selling merch. I had no job. I had no prospects. I had no direction. I had no band. I had nothing. So I came home from that tour. I was like, I got to get a job. So I went to a temp agency and I got a job. And then right at that point, my friend was moving to Philadelphia for college. He's like, do you want to move in with us? And I was like, yes. And he had to like lend me the money for the security deposit.
Oh man.
I had no money. And I just, thank God he did, because, I moved out and we lived in like North Philly somewhere.
Okay.
And then I was in Philly from 2003 till 2012. So pretty long time.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I lived in Philly from 2015 until 2021.
Oh, really? What were
Yeah.
you there for?
My wife's job. She works in construction, and she helped build the new Big Penn medicine hospital facility.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Wait, where are you now?
Back in DC, just in the suburbs of DC.
Okay.
That's where I grew up. So yeah.
How did you like Philly?
It was great. Philly was cool because like DC, with the political culture and just like the influx of people, it's all about your job and who you know. And like, even though there's this big hardcore punk history here, it's not like a thing that the average person who lives here is involved with. And so like living in Fishtown in Philly, it was just like, Jay from Brain Supreme and Shai Hulud and Cut My Hair, and just like you're surrounded by band guys, and like Liam from Dillinger was my neighbor, and like the guys from Here Thought You Were my neighbors. So it's like it was a whole different vibe. It was cool. We were sad to leave because my wife never thought she would live in Philly. And yeah, she was like, "Oh, it's home."
You lived in Fishtown too. Me too.
Yeah. It was a good time.
I liked
think it was
it.
a little nicer when I lived there than when you lived there, though.
Yeah. I lived in Fishtown. Let's see, 06 and 07, and that was when like a lot of gentrification started, but nothing like now.
Oh yeah. It was crazy. What then took you from Philly to New York? Just a change of scenery?
My job. I somehow got a promotion, and I told them I would like be open to moving up here if anything ever opened up. So in 2012 they're like, hey, there's an opening. I was working as a manager at a site, and there was an opening at a site up here in New York, and they're like, we want you to go there. And I was like, done, I'll do it. And I was happy to, because like my life was like messy in Philly. I was in bad shape. I was like drunk all the time, high all the time. I don't know. Like the people like my social circle kind of fell apart. It was like everything was collapsing all at once. So I was ready for a change. And then, so in September of 2012, I moved up here, and I've been up here ever since in Brooklyn. There was like 3 months where I lived with my sister in Westchester just to adjust. And then I've been in Brooklyn ever since. And I love it. I've always wanted to live in New York City, but I never thought it could actually be a possibility. Yeah. Because, I mean, have you been here?
Oh, yeah.
I remember visiting here and being like, how? Like, how do people afford this? How do you even find an apartment? It's just so overwhelming when you first come here, because most people like take the bus or train to Penn Station, and you get out and you're like, what the fuck? But like, once you're here for a while, it all makes sense. There's always new stuff, but like, I love it. I'm happy that I've had the opportunity to be here, and I don't have any plans to leave anytime soon.
Yeah. Was moving to New York kind of the genesis moment for sobriety for you, as like a reset button, or did that come later?
Let's see. how can I put this? Um, let's say later.
Okay.
I always, all right. It's been a while. It's been years and years that I've been sober now.
Yeah.
I'm murky about the actual timeline though, because I'm always afraid someone from work is going to somehow hear me say this, and
They'll have a photo of you.
yeah, they'll be like, wait, so back in no, but it happened after I moved to New York City, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
And it's been years now, but it was definitely necessary. It was definitely a necessary choice. I was basically leading two different lives, you know, because most of the people I hung out with didn't get down like I did. So it was 2 or 3 different lives leading it all at once, and it's so much better. Well, one, I had to stop because I was going to die. It was headed that way. It was bad, but just to be able to just say things for what they are now, you know, is like such a relief. Like no more lying. Like, oh yeah, I can't make it to the thing because well, I don't know, I'm sick. What? Yeah. now if I'm sick, I'm sick. If I'm not, I'm not. I can just say what is, and it's a big relief. Yeah.
Let's shift and talk about the podcast. I'm gonna ask 3 questions at once.
Yes.
So you can just tackle this. 1, what was the genesis and what made you want to start podcasting? 2, talk about the name change from Northeast Scene to the New Scene. And then how'd you get connected with Iodine Records, and what does that look like for the podcast?
So I never intended to do a podcast. All right. So like I was on Instagram, and this is like right before the pandemic, like leading up, maybe 6-7 months leading up to the pandemic. I would go to like nobody. I live in New York, right? I didn't know anybody who listened to the music that I did. Nobody. So I would go like see bands, and I would always go by myself because no one like really listened to anything that I did. And then I would post it on Instagram, and I'd be like, "Oh, I just saw Cave In play like the best set ever," and it would get like 3 likes. And I was like, "Wow, I get the worst engagement ever on my account. I have no one to go to shows with. Where is everybody?" What was like the old days where we, you know, you go to a show and see like 40 people. So somehow I just came across all these pages like Delaware 90s Hardcore and Tim Morris. There was like an Instagram account for Tim Morris videos and Northwest Music Scene. All these pages of flyers and ticket stubs and bands and shows and thriving communities.
Yeah.
And I was like, great, I'll make one. So I made, and I was like, all right, what am I going to call it? Philly Hardcore? No, because I don't want a bunch of guys to be like, you're not from Philly, you're not into hardcore. what you listen to isn't hardcore. So I was like, all right, that's out. So then I was like, let's see, like New York hardcore? No, I can't claim that. No. So I was like, wait, Philly, New York, Maryland. How about Northeast? The Northeast scene. That then we can like post stuff from everywhere, right? So I made an Instagram account called the Northeast Scene, and my friend Tommy, who was my co-host on the podcast and occasionally still is. I'm like, he was the only person who would like actually respond to my text messages all the time. Because you know how like I don't really do it so much anymore, but you know how you would like send someone a song, you're like, check out this band, or hey, check this out, and like they just don't respond, or you never hear from. Tommy would respond to everything. He would like he would listen to every band. He would have conversations with me about everything. The only person. So I said to him, hey, I'm starting this Instagram. If you have ticket stubs, if you have flyers, if you have old stuff, which I know you do, send it to me. We'll post it. So once a day, whatever, I'd post a ticket stub, a video. If I went to a show, I'd post a video, and I was following a bunch of accounts. This, you know, the engagement was getting good. And I said to Tommy, if we get to 1,000 followers on this Instagram account, we will do a podcast. And he was like, all right. So we quickly got to 1,000. Actually, here's the moment I got the idea for the podcast. I was at an All Else Failed show in Philly with Tommy, and we were talking to Pat Troxel from Lovelorn and what's the other band? And Mugger. Yeah, and he was in Creepoid as well. He was telling these stories about like, hold on, let me get this window back up. Okay. So he was telling just these incredible stories about like being on tour and fights and all this stuff. And I nudged Tommy. I was like, this is the show. This is going to be the show. And I was inspired by a podcast. I'm not going to say which one because I'd like to keep it the lore spicy or whatever. Yeah. But I was inspired by another podcast I listened to, and it's not a music podcast, but it was like two friends hanging out, and like they'd have other friends on, and they would do interviews like sometimes. Yeah. And so I liked their format. I liked the kinship. I liked the hanging out. I was like, that's what we'll do. So I rented a hotel room in Center City, Philadelphia. And I was like, we're going to record the first 4 episodes. This is right before the pandemic, February of 2020.
Nice.
So we did an intro episode to explain who we were. Mm-hmm. We did episode 2, which was with Mike Shaw of This Day Forward. Episode 3 with Pat Shannon of All Else Failed. And then we had another interview scheduled, but they didn't show up. And so we did another like episode, just us talking. Pandemic hits. And I was only going to do it like in person. I was only going to do in-person interviews because I'm like, you'll get the best interview. It'll be, and I don't know how I was going to do that. Like, was I going to drive to North Carolina to talk to Hope's Fall? Like, I don't know what I was thinking. But the pandemic hits, and I was like, Howard Stern was doing shows on Zoom. Mm-hmm. And I was like, if Howard Stern can do a show on Zoom, we can do it. So I'm like, let's make it weekly. Let's make the show weekly. We've got the time, and it's been weekly ever since. We posted 4 episodes in March, all in one day, and then in April we started doing it every week. So like it's been weekly every week since April of 2020. So that's the origin of the podcast. And then I had Casey from Iodine Recordings on the show, I think the first year.
Okay.
And he liked it. He liked the podcast. He thought it was a really good interview. And it was one of our most listened to interviews for a while, like for that whole first year. And like, I want to say sometime the next year, he's like, hey, we should do a partnership or something. He'd like texted me or something, email, I don't remember. And he's like, we should do like a partnership. Yeah. And I almost like, I didn't even comprehend it. Like my first reaction a lot of times is to think that like someone's trying to screw me over or like take advantage of me somehow. I don't know what, it's just the way I think. Yeah. So he's like, we should do like a partnership. And I'm like, no, I don't want someone to like, I thought this, I was like, I don't want someone to like take control of my show or change it or any of that stuff. So he mentioned it once and I just didn't really think about it. And then he brought it up again and then it clicked. He's like, we should like team up. We should do something. Cause he wanted to do a podcast, but he couldn't. Mm-hmm. At that time, it was just him and the label was just coming back and he did not have the capacity to do a podcast, which is like a full-time job.
Yeah.
So he's like, what if like we have a partnership, like, well, so it's like, I forget exactly how we talked about it, but we started brainstorming as if I was going to be, the podcast would be signed to the label and I knew the name wasn't going to work. I didn't like the name. It was, it was the Northeast Scene. It was confusing. Guests thought that they had to be from the Northeast to be on the show. They thought they had to talk about the Northeast. And it was like a whole, I knew I didn't like it. I didn't like it. And I don't remember who came up with the name. I think maybe Casey did. Because, he was like, let's change the name. The New Scene was brought up at one point. And I was like, fine. And then we worked on the look of the show. We didn't really change the format too much. I think the only thing we changed was like, we used to do a longer intro where Tommy and I would just talk about stuff. And we like pushed a lot of that to the end in case people just want to get to the interview. I think that was really the only major change. And we're like, all right, we're going to launch it on this date. And we launched it with Andrew from Strife, Daryl from Snapcase, and Scott from Earth Crisis, because those guys were all doing a big tour at that time.
Yeah.
So they were doing like a press run, and we timed the new scene changeover with those 3 interviews, and it's been great. So that's how the partnership came about, and it's been going great ever since. That was all 3 questions, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Got them. Yeah. What's been the biggest learning curve for you as a podcast host, kind of like stepping into this? I mean, do you view yourself as a journalist, or is it like, I mean,
yes. That's why all right. When I started this show, when I would listen to other podcasts, and I was so interested in the story of these bands, and I you can only get so much from the internet. I wanted to know the stuff I ask, like, how did you start? Where did you start? All the stuff I ask if you've heard the show. And I wasn't hearing that. I would listen to other podcasts and they would just talk about like nothing, or like, hey, we knew each other a while ago, or I wanted the story. So and the learning curve, oh my God, the amount of stuff I've learned over the past 4 years has been crazy. I was just thinking about this. Like, I used to be too afraid to email PR people. I used to be too afraid to ask bands to come on. Still kind of am, if I have to like go direct, if there's no in. I used to just be afraid to ask common questions like, is it okay to talk about this? Is it okay to list this band on the graphic? I'm going to put it up on this basic communication I had to learn. Becoming a better interviewer, becoming a better podcaster. If anyone out there wants to do a podcast, edit your own show. You will become better naturally. And then just like being natural just comes over time, over years. When I listen back to shows from like 2 or 3 years ago, I kind of talk like this in the beginning, and I'm like, why the hell am I doing that? Like I have no idea how I started doing that or why. It just had to naturally evolve, become more natural, just be me. Researching guests, making an agenda. Tommy and I used to just get on without an agenda, and like I would have questions, but I wouldn't even tell him like, here's what we're going to do, here's the questions. So we would like start to prepare for guests and be ready, and he would have access to the questions and the talking points. And my edict is to never get lazy. So I've only done more work as time goes on. Like there's been days where I've done like a full 2 days of preparation for guests, because I'm not like an expert on every guest who comes on. Yeah. So I know all the bands, but I'm not like a super expert on every band. So I've done hours and hours and hours of research. I'll typically have 1 to 2 pages of notes in front of me that I'll work off of, but I also want to stay focused on the conversation and just be in the moment. That's I used to stick to a formula, right? And because I'm just nervous. I was just nervous all the time. So I would kind of stick to a formula. And when I had Tim Barry on from Avail, Tommy had just left the show. And I was really sad. And Tim Barry was the first interview I did without Tommy. And for the first time, I always ask the person, like, how are you doing today? Yeah. And then Tim came back and asked me, how are you doing? And no one ever did that before. And I was so caught off guard. I was like, I'm really sad because my co-host just left, and this is the first interview I'm doing without him. And we just talked, and there was no script. There was no timeline. There was no format. We just talked. And from then on, I'm like, all right, the notes are the notes. It doesn't have to go in any order. I'm just going to be in the moment. And so, doing the show every week, editing myself, listening back to myself sometimes, and just putting in the work up front to really be familiar with who you're talking to. Those are key if you want to be good. Yeah.
On top of the podcast, you now have this new band, Memory Entry. How did this project get started?
All All right. 2019, again, right before the pandemic. A lot of things happening right before the pandemic. It's funny to think about. My friend Chris, who's the drummer of the band, we have a mutual friend, Armando. So he gets a group text going. He's like, guys, let's jam. And I was like, sure. I'm not in a band. I don't even think the podcast was really a thing yet.
Yeah.
So we got into the practice space and we're like, what are we going to do? And I was like, I don't know. And we're like, what's one band we all like? Ink and Dagger. Okay. So I wrote like a Ink and Dagger style song, which is the song Crawler, which is the first single that you'll all be hearing. And the pandemic hits. And then we didn't get back together until August of 2021.
Oh, geez.
That was the next practice from February of 2020. Yeah. Okay. So like over a year later. And then, we would play, we would practice, but it wasn't like, it was like something I did like when I could, because I had the podcast was really busy. It was getting really busy because the iodine thing just happened. Yeah. I was in the Darling Fire last year. I played bass. I was in that band all of last year and working on that band. So this band wasn't my focus, my main focus. But then last year, around this time, I got struck with like inspiration like I've never felt before in my life. It was like a physical, crazy thing. And I was just like, I have to do something with this. I have to write a script. I have to write a TV show. And then I was like, wait, I'm in this band. Let me use some of this story for the band. So now I had like a pathway, like a lyrical inspiration, like a story. So I ran it by the guys and they were on board with it. And then we picked the name. The name Memory Entry comes from a song by Essel Fortium. It's like an ambient song that's called, it's weird. It's like memory equals entry / / then there's like 5 backslashes. so that song kind of kicked all of this off and I named the band Memory Entry. So around this time last year, we started taking it seriously and we recorded and it was going to be 4 songs, but I wanted to write another one quick before we went in the studio, which we did. So they will be coming out sometime early next year. I can't talk about the release yet, but but I can say that it will be a joint venture between the great Mind Over Matter Records and the great Iodine Recordings.
That's nice.
Yeah,
I love the name Memory Entry for a band, especially as you're older. So much of songwriting is like, just sharing your thoughts and like it can be nostalgic. And so it's like a beautiful name for a band.
Thank you. Yeah, it's thank you, Essel Fortium, for the inspiration. And that's a lot of the themes, a lot of the lyrical themes are like that. Like the story is kind of like me complaining about the normal stuff I would complain about in songs, like these people weren't nice to me, this relationship didn't work out, whatever. But then like realizing that there's something else out there, but we don't know what it is. And it's just like, I would have these recurring dreams about the past, and I would have these recurring dreams about people in my life, some around, some still not. And it would be like recurring places in the dreams to the point where it felt real. It felt like a second life almost in another dimension. So it's kind of like, just figuring out something else is out there. We don't know what it is and trying to rectify the past.
Yeah.
But we don't know what we have to rectify.
You brought it up. How'd you end up working with the Darling Fire and play bass with them?
I went to see them when they played St. Vitus in January of 23. They opened for Silent Drive. And I liked the band. They were in my top 10 for 2022, I think, when that record came out. And I was talking to Geronimo, the guitar player, and I was at the show and he's like, I forget how it came up, but he's like, we need a bass player. do you play? Do you want to? And I was like, let me think about it. 'Cause I didn't think I could do it with the podcast and like, and I was scared. I was like scared to do it. I didn't know if I could. So I waited a day, and then I was like, all right, I'll do it. Let's give it a shot. And then they sent me videos of Mike, their other guitar player. He's like kind of a music virtuoso, and he did like a playthrough of their set on bass. Took me 3 months to learn and like get it good because they're pretty proggy. Yeah, like they're a pretty proggy band. I don't know if it fully comes across on the recording, or maybe I didn't pay enough attention. But there's a lot of movement, and I hadn't been in a band I hadn't played bass in a band in 6 or 7 years. Mm-hmm. So I spent all my time learning that set, and then I think we played our first shows in June. We did a run with Spotlights, and that was incredible. And then we did another run in October, 3 or 4 shows around Fest. We didn't actually play Fest, but we did like a pre-show and then a couple other dates in Georgia and whatnot. I think those were the only shows we played, but it was great. I was so happy to be in a band again. I was so happy to be in that band again. I was so happy to be in a band again. I was so happy to be in that band.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of fun. But, after that last run, I started taking Memory Entry more seriously. Mm-hmm. And I realized I wasn't going to be able to do both because 2 of them are in Atlanta. The other guitar player's in South Florida. Yeah. And I'm up here in New York City. And the drummer, my friend John, he was up here too. So we just couldn't work it out geographically anymore. So, I had to make the tough choice. So here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With these songs coming out with Memory Entry, is your hope to like go on a small run and tour, or with the podcast, is that not feasible? And it's just like, you're just excited to present the music and maybe play a show in Brooklyn or something?
No, we will play. And my goal is to do like targeted week tours. Mm-hmm. Like I'll do like East Coast, Midwest, West. I want to really do this as much as I can while I'm young enough to still do it.
Yeah.
And it's, I'm going to do as much as I can. And it's a heavier band. Ink and Dagger is an influence. There's a lot of like classic post-hardcore emo influence, Jets to Brazil, Blue Tip, a lot of classic screamo influence, Jerome's Dream, Page 99, City of Caterpillar, Sleepy Time Trio, Max Colby. So imagine all those things together, but it is on the heavier side. And just to give everybody an idea of what it sounds like. But listen, the first single is out there right now. And so I want to do as much as I can, as much as possible. And the way I record the podcast, I'll usually record like, I want to be like a month, 2 months out max. Mm-hmm. I'll typically be booked up 3-4 months at a time. But I don't like to record further out than 2 months because I want the episodes to be fresh.
Okay. Yeah.
So if I was going to be on tour or something, I would just make sure I have an episode ready for that week, which I've done. I did that when I was in the Darling Fire.
Is there anything else you want to say about the band or the podcast? Or
everybody listen to the New Scene, and listen, I'm on the push to 300 Apple Podcast reviews, which seem to be impossible to get. They're so hard to get. I don't know why. So if you're listening to this and you like my show, rate me 5 stars. The Memory Entry first single is out. Oh, we're playing. We're playing Sunday, August 25th, opening for On the Might of Princes and This Day Forward. That's going to be a fun show. Come to that.